Let the lie come into the world, even dominate the world, but not through me. Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn. We like to think evil is somewhere else. It wears a uniform, carries a weapon, signs papers behind a closed door. But Solzhenitsyn, he says no. That's the comfortable version of evil. The real one, it's quieter. It whispers. It makes small compromises. And eventually, it uses you to do its work. Before I read Solzhenitsyn, I thought of evil as something grand, historical, cinematic. But in his world, it starts with a shrug, a silence, a lie you let pass because it's easier. That is what makes his voice so unsettling, because he doesn't let you off the hook. He's not just talking about Stalin or the gulags or the Soviet state. He's talking about the part of each of us that looks the other way, the little justifications, the moral laziness, the part that says, well, what can I do? Solzhenitsyn was a soldier, a teacher, a prisoner, a prophet. He was imprisoned for a sentence he wrote in a private letter. He went from believing in the revolution to calling it a machine that eats souls. He faced evil face to face, and he refused to participate in it. And somehow, out of all that suffering, he didn't become bitter. He became clear. In this video, I want to talk about that clarity, about who Solzhenitsyn was, what he lived through, what he wrote, and more importantly, what he understood about evil that we still don't. Because as comforting as it is to think we are the good ones, Solzhenitsyn would say, check again, early life, and the making of a dissident. Solzhenitsyn was born in 1918, just after the Russian Revolution. His father died before he was born, so he was raised by his mother, a woman who quietly believed in God in a time when that alone could make you suspicious. He grew up poor, smart, and deeply idealistic. Like many young men in Soviet Russia, he believed in the revolution, not blindly, but earnestly. He thought socialism could build a fairer world, and he believed literature, especially Russian literature, had a moral mission: to elevate, to challenge, to speak truth. As a teenager, he read Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, Chekhov, the big souls, the ones who didn't flinch at human darkness. And like them, Solzhenitsyn wanted to be a writer. But first, he studied math and physics, because under Stalin, wanting to be a writer was a risky career choice. Then came World War II. Solzhenitsyn fought as a young artillery officer. He was brave, decorated, and quietly disillusioned. He saw corruption, incompetence, cruelty on both sides. But what got him arrested wasn't anything he did on the battlefield. It was a few sentences he wrote in a private letter to a friend, criticizing Stalin. That was enough. He was sentenced to 8 years in a labor camp. No trial, no defense, just gone. And that's where the real Solzhenitsyn was born. Not in the classroom, not in the war, but in the Gulag. It's strange to say someone's life begins in a prison camp, but in his case, it fits, because that's where the mask comes off. That's where ideology collapses, and that's where he started to see evil, not as an idea, but as a system of small, obedient people doing their jobs, following rules, saying nothing. That was his education. A place where books were banned, hope was dangerous, and truth could get you killed. And he started writing in secret, in code, on scraps, memorizing entire chapters, Because when you're surrounded by lies, telling the truth becomes sacred. That's how a soldier became a dissident, and how a dissident became one of the clearest moral voices of the 20th century. Next, we enter the place that shaped him most, the Gulag. Live in the Gulag, a crash course in human darkness. If you ever want to understand what a system looks like when it forgets the individual completely, read about the Gulag. Or better yet, read Solzhenitsyn's account of it. He spent 8 years there. First, in hard labor camps. Then, in what they called a sharashka, a kind of scientific prison for educated inmates. From coal mines to concrete floors. From cold that could kill to the quiet brutality of bureaucracy. This was where Solzhenitsyn met evil in its most ordinary form. Not the kind that wears a villain's face, but the kind that stamps your file, that shrugs, that says, "I'm just doing my job." It's easy to imagine evil as exceptional, but Solzhenitsyn forces you to see how banal it can be, how obedient, how routine. He saw men beaten for nothing. He saw some prisoners turn savage to survive, and others give away their last crust of bread. He saw guards numb to suffering, doctors faking diagnoses to save prisoners, and over time, he stopped asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and started asking, "What does this reveal about all of us?" It's in the Gulag that he wrote the most devastating line of his entire life. Maybe the most devastating line of the 20th century. The line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. That line changes you. Because it means evil isn't out there somewhere. It's in here, in me, in you, in the choices we make every day. Not to speak, not to resist, not to notice. And he wasn't trying to be dramatic. He was being precise. He watched other prisoners break, some quickly, some slowly. And he started to realize something terrifying. Everyone thinks they are the exception. Everyone thinks, "I would have done the right thing." But in reality, most people go along. They choose survival over conscience. They adapt. Solzhenitsyn's great insight is that systems like the Gulag don't just crush bodies, they test souls. They reveal who we are when no one is watching. And that test isn't confined to Siberia. It's everywhere. It's at work. It's in politics. It's in the small daily decisions to go along with the thing we know is wrong. He survived the camps, but he didn't leave them behind. He carried them into everything he wrote. Next, we explore that haunting line, the one that cuts through us all, the line between good and evil. If only it were all so simple. If only there were evil people somewhere insidiously committing evil deeds, and it were necessary only to separate them from the rest of us and destroy them. But the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. And who is willing to destroy a piece of his own heart? Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn. It's one of the most quoted passages in modern literature, and one of the least absorbed. Because it doesn't let you blame. It doesn't let you point fingers. It doesn't care if you're left, right, rich, poor, religious, secular. Solzhenitsyn is telling you the real struggle isn't between you and them. It's between you and you. That's what makes his writing feel so intimate and so uncomfortable. He knew what it was to suffer unjustly, but instead of turning that pain into anger, he turned it into reflection. He asked, "When I had power, how did I behave? What little cruelties did I excuse? What lies did I tell myself so I could sleep? He wasn't interested in abstract villains. He wanted to know, how does an ordinary person become part of a system that ruins lives? That question runs through the Gulag Archipelago, his massive, unflinching account of the Soviet labor camps. It's not just a history book, it's a confession, a prayer, a warning. Because once you accept that evil isn't just some external threat, that it's something you have to guard against inside yourself, it changes how you live. You stop pretending you're immune. You start watching your compromises, your silences, your convenience. Solzhenitsyn said, the real danger isn't when a society is run by bad people. It's when a society stops asking what good even means. When truth is negotiated, when language is corrupted, when you're rewarded for obedience, not integrity. And here is the twist. He doesn't say you can eliminate evil, only that you can wrestle with it. That is the work. Not to be pure, but to be honest about your impurities. Not to save the world, but to refuse to lie, even a little. And in a world where everyone is screaming about who the bad guys are, Solzhenitsyn calmly turns the mirror around. The battlefield is your own heart. Are you willing to fight there? Next, we turn to the books that made him dangerous. Not just to the Soviets, but to anyone who prefers comfort over truth. Writing as resistance, the birth of a moral giant. For most of his life, Solzhenitsyn was a prisoner, first by bars, then by silence. He wasn't supposed to write. He wasn't supposed to publish. He definitely wasn't supposed to tell the truth. But he did all those things, and he did them anyway. His first breakthrough was One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, a slim, sharp novel that did the unthinkable in 1962 Soviet Russia. It portrayed a Gulag prisoner as a human being, not an enemy, not a traitor, just a man trying to survive one cold, grey, merciless day. The book exploded. For a brief moment, truth slipped past the censors. People read it and said, I didn't know. People read it and whispered, I lived this. But that moment didn't last. Solzhenitsyn kept writing, quietly, dangerously, smuggling manuscripts, dictating paragraphs to friends, hiding pages in walls, in attics, in memory. Because now, he was writing the book that would shake the system. The Gulag Archipelago wasn't just a book. It was an indictment. Thousands of pages, dozens of testimonies, an underground map of a society built on fear, silence, and lies. It was a book you could be imprisoned for owning. And people were. When it was finally published in the West in 1973, the world could no longer pretend not to know. The Soviet Union had long been admired by many Western intellectuals. Solzhenitsyn shattered that illusion. But he didn't write to please the West either. He warned that comfort, too, can be its own kind of prison. That moral rot doesn't only wear jackboots. It can wear loafers. That you can lose your soul not just through violence, but through distraction, self-satisfaction, and indifference. That is what made Solzhenitsyn dangerous, not just to communists, to anyone who didn't want to look too closely, because he wasn't writing for applause. He was writing to stay human in a world that punished humanity. And in that, he became more than a writer. He became a moral witness. The Cost of Truth, Exile and Isolation. In 1974, Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn was arrested again. This time, the Soviet Union didn't throw him in a prison camp. They threw him out of the country. Within hours of being detained, he was stripped of his citizenship, hustled into a plane, and exiled to West Germany. His passport stamped with nothing but rejection. You would think this was freedom. No more KGB surveillance, no more censorship. But Solzhenitsyn wasn't celebrating. He didn't want exile. He wanted to speak the truth inside his own country. He wanted Russia to hear him, not the West. But now he was homeless, a man without a nation, a prophet without a pulpit. He eventually settled in a quiet house in rural Vermont. You can still see photos of him there. A bearded, intense figure chopping wood, wearing layers in the snow, far away from Moscow, far away from the spotlight. And yet, he didn't stop speaking. In fact, one of his most controversial speeches came in 1978 at Harvard. People expected a grateful refugee ready to praise the West. What they got was something else. Solzhenitsyn told a room full of intellectuals and politicians that the West, too, was sick, that freedom without virtue is hollow, that materialism can numb the soul, that truth can be lost not only through oppression but through comfort. A decline in courage may be the most striking feature which an outside observer notices in the West today. That line didn't go down well. Many dismissed him as old-fashioned, religious, cranky. But that's the thing about Solzhenitsyn. He wasn't trying to win anyone's approval. He was trying to save the soul of a civilization. And he believed that soul was at risk, whether you lived under the shadow of Stalin or the shadow of convenience. For 20 years, he stayed in that Vermont cabin, writing, reading, reflecting. A man who had survived war, prison, cancer, and betrayal, and who still believed that the individual conscience mattered more than any ideology. He returned to Russia in the 1990s after the fall of the Soviet Union, but the country had changed, and so had he. He spent his final years quietly, warning anyone who would listen. The greatest danger isn't that evil wins. It's that we stop noticing when it begins. Why Solzhenitsyn still matters today. It's easy to think Solzhenitsyn belongs to history. The Cold War, the Gulag, the Iron Curtain. That was then. But if you listen closely to what he is actually saying, you realize he's writing for now, this century, this moment, us. Because his warning was never about one regime, one country, one ideology. It was about a condition, the human tendency to look away, to justify, to obey, to stay comfortable. And that condition is alive and well. We don't need labor camps to live in denial. We don't need censors to silence ourselves. We do it voluntarily every time we say, "It's not my problem," or "That's just the way it is," or "What can one person do?" Solzhenitsyn said, that is exactly how evil wins. And here's the thing. He never claimed to be a saint. He was deeply aware of his own failings. He was proud, stubborn, moralistic at times. But that's what makes him believable. He didn't preach from a pedestal. He wrote from experience, from suffering, from self-interrogation. He didn't offer easy answers, only hard questions. How much truth are you willing to tell? What lies are you quietly part of? What are you pretending not to see? Those questions don't expire. They don't belong to one era or one ideology. They belong to every moment where power tempts, where silence protects, where comfort numbs. In a time of noise and outrage, Solzhenitsyn reminds us that the real revolution is internal, that the only true resistance is to live as if the truth matters, even when no one is watching. Let your credo be this: let the lie come into the world. Let it even triumph, but not through me. That sentence might be the most important line you read this year, because we are all in danger of letting the lie pass through us. And Solzhenitsyn, with all his ragged honesty and wounded clarity, still whispers, "Don't." A man who refuses to lie. There are people you read because they entertain you. There are people you read because they explain the world. And then there are people like Solzhenitsyn. You read him because he makes you uncomfortable in all the right ways. He doesn't give you slogans. He doesn't offer comfort. He gives you a mirror and asks, are you brave enough to look into it? Because at the heart of everything he wrote, whether it was about gulags, ideology, or the rot of comfort, there was one insistence. Don't lie. Not to others, not to yourself. He paid the price for that refusal. He lost his country, he lost friends, he spent years in isolation, but he never let the lie pass through him. And that, in the end, was his greatest act of resistance. In a world addicted to spin, spectacle, and shortcuts, Solzhenitsyn still speaks with the quiet authority of a man who suffered, saw the worst, and somehow came out of it believing that truth still matters. He didn't write for fame. He didn't write for applause. He wrote to keep something human alive, and he succeeded. The simple step of a courageous individual is not to take part in the lie. One word of truth outweighs the world. If you take one thing from him, let it be that. In the face of cynicism, confusion, manipulation, don't be clever. Don't be superior. Be honest. Be awake. Be unwilling to lie. That's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's as small as a sentence you won't repeat, a narrative you won't sell, a job you quietly leave, a friend you stand beside. Solzhenitsyn reminds us, real strength isn't loud. It's moral, it's silent, it's steady. And maybe that's the gift he leaves behind. Not a map, not a political program, but a compass. The kind that doesn't point left or right, but inward, toward the heart, where the real line is drawn.